Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about public interest law and the ways that we can address the huge need for legal representation in our country today. I was at a party recently, and a friend of mine said we need to send more Muslim students into law school because there's so many attacks on our Muslim community, on our faith here in the United States, so many attacks on immigrants, some of whom are Muslim. And so we need more lawyers in the community. And I said, I don't think that's going to be the solution. He said, but we're sending all these kids to medical school and they're becoming engineers and they're going into finance and business and other lucrative fields, and we need more lawyers to be there to defend us in all of these important civil rights and civil liberties and immigration related issues. Here's the thing, just sending kids to law school isn't going to mean that those kids are going to end up doing public interest work, working on these important civil liberties issues, or addressing the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society. This friend was talking about the Muslim community and some of the issues that face the Muslim community. I want to point out that the advice that I have and the points that I want to make are applicable to all vulnerable communities. Any community that feels it has a great need for lawyers, but that need is unmet, these points are relevant to all of these communities. There are 1.3 million lawyers in the United States. Only a tiny fraction of those lawyers work in public interest work. Public interest work is working in civil legal aid or in public defender offices. There are about 11,000 lawyers working full time in the United States in civil legal aid organizations. Maybe about 15,000 more work as full-time public defenders in state and county levels. Now, that's 26,000 lawyers coast to coast out of 1.3 million who have dedicated their careers to representing the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society. Now, that number doesn't factor in nonprofit organizations that do legal work, that do impact litigation, or federal defenders. So let's be generous, double that number. So not 26,000, but 52,000. That's about 4% of the entire legal community that does public interest work, that's working to address the needs of the most vulnerable and the poorest. Now, keep in mind, when you have these cases that are impinging on students' free speech rights and their rights to assembly, when you're talking about these deportation cases, these arrests of people who are US citizens that are being arrested unlawfully, these folks generally are not going to be individuals who have the resources to retain a private attorney. If you're in deportation proceedings or you're in a criminal case, you don't have a choice. If you can afford an attorney, you need to spend that money. But for a lot of these issues, people just decide to let it go, not pursue it. Why? Because they can't afford to pursue it. They can't afford not to let it go. So there's a dearth of lawyers out there who can represent the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society, whether it's in the Muslim community, the broader immigrant community, the LGBTQ community, or any other vulnerable community. There's a dearth of lawyers who are available to do that. So you might say, well, that's exactly why we want to send more kids to go to law school so that they can come out and do this work. Well, there are a couple issues. Number one, are there jobs at the other end? And number two, do they want to? Number one, the data that I've seen shows that about 8.9, so under 10% of law school graduates in 2023 went into public interest work. So over 90% of the kids who graduated from law school in 2023 went into something other than public interest work. They went into work that was not focused primarily on helping the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society. I don't blame them because so many students come out of law school with huge amounts of debt, and the pay that's available in public interest work is simply not enough to offset the expense of paying that debt down. Number two, there's a perception that there are all these public interest jobs that aren't being filled, and that's just not the case. I was lucky enough to land a job with the public defender's office in law school. And for every position that was open, there were hundreds of applicants back then. I think that if we looked at the data now for every public defender job, for every public interest job, there is a lot of competition. So there are students who want to do this public interest work, but they just can't find a paid position to do it. So that 90% who are going into something other than public interest, that doesn't mean that 90% of those students didn't want to do public interest work. It's that there weren't enough public interest jobs that were funded for them to do that work. Additionally, there's a percentage of those 90% that don't go into public interest work because the jobs in the public interest sector are so low paying that they can't manage the debt that students have when they get out of law school. So that's another problem. And thirdly, just sending more kids to law school isn't going to address the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable in our societies. And here's why. Not everybody who goes to law school to save the world. If you've lived long enough, you will have heard everything. And in my lifetime, I have heard many lawyers say, you know, I feel embarrassed, and I don't like to say this out loud, but I'm not really that interested in doing public interest work. I'm not interested in saving the world. I went to law school so that I could have a good life. I went to law school because I thought that I could make a good living and lead a comfortable life. And I have, and I'm grateful. That's their right. So just sending more kids to law school doesn't mean that they're going to want to go into public interest work. So the solution to the problem is number one, we need to fund more public interest roles because there aren't nearly enough public interest jobs that are funded adequately to address the unmet needs in our society. Number two, we need to fund scholarships or find ways to bring down the cost of legal education because even if we have well funded public interest jobs, but the debt that kids have to incur to get law degrees are so burdensome that they need to find private sector jobs, then we will have failed. And third, we need to recruit the right kids to go into law school to fill the roles of public interest law. That means that we have got to identify and nurture those students in high school and in college who have an interest in doing this work and then support them through high school and college and through law school and into their early careers so that they can become public interest lawyers and so that they can do this work. So it's not just a matter of sending more kids into the pipeline. More lawyers does not equal more justice. More justice focused lawyers with justice focused jobs will lead to more justice.